All right, so some time ago, a man and a woman got together and they shared their DNA, and that's how I started, and that's how you started. We were born. Okay, so we're going to look at human development, which is basically the study of how we change through time from conception till death. Okay, there's a lot to it because we change cognitively, we change socially, emotionally, and obviously physically. Also, there's lots of questions, one of the big ones, of course, we've spoke about before is the nature-nurture controversy, and how much does it have to play in who we end up being in our lives. Okay, so human development coming up right now. All right, developmental psychology. We're going to look at developmental issues with prenatal development and the newborn. Here are the objectives. Have a look at them, and we shall carry on. Okay, so first of all, developmental psychology is the study of basically our entire lifespan, from conception till the time of death. Okay, and we change all that way. And there's three kind of major questions that we look at. We look at the nature versus nurture question. Obviously there's lots of things that are passed on from our parents that we have no say in, and really the environment doesn't have much effect on. And yet there are other things that the environment plays a very strong role in. However, most things it's a combination of both, and we actually want to find out, how much environmental influence is there as opposed to the genetic influence that we have. Okay, the continuity and stages ideas. Do we develop, kind of like how a tree grows, how it goes from a small tree to a big tree, always recognizable as a tree? Or do we jump through stages, kind of like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly? There's the two different ideas, and we find that there's a lot of stage theories, and we're going to have to pay attention to them. They have a lot of merit to them. However, we're finding probably more and more that research is showing that it's a bit more continuous than it is stage. However, our brains do change quite significantly in spurts at times, which give us different reasoning powers and thinking abilities. Stability and change. This is looking at, are you the same person throughout your lifetime? The same kind of personality traits. Are you an older version now of what you were when you were just a little kid at the age of 2? Are you going to be the same person at the age of 40? Or do we actually change through our lifetime? Of course, it all starts with conception. We get, the 200 million sperm racing towards an egg, which is the largest cell. Of course, they're only in female bodies. Guys, you don't have any eggs. They're about the size of a sand or a period in a sentence. Okay, and the difference is males have so many of these. They can produce children for a long time. Females, you have a limited amount, and they all don't mature. Okay, so, and once they're gone, they're gone. You can't have children. But that one sperm cell outraces all the others and penetrates the layer of the egg, and then it closes it off to all the others. And that's where everything begins. So at conception, the fertilized egg becomes a zygote. Now, the zygote, we find only about half of the zygotes, half of the fertilized eggs will survive beyond the 2-week period, beyond the first 2 weeks. So you can consider yourself lucky. Think of all the chance circumstances that could have happened with all the different combinations of DNA and the fact that you survived. So you're doing pretty well. You can be pretty thankful that you did that well. And then the cells begin division. It changes from 1 cell to 2 to 4 to 8 and so on. Once we get up into about 100 cells, they start to differentiate. These cells will decide, what they're going to do. One cell decides it's going to be part of your brain, another cell will be part of your intestines, one part of your heart, and they're all the same. And this is one of the things that we're just starting to learn about, how these cells do this. Okay, so at about 37 weeks, it will attach to the uterine wall. It travels where it's being conceived into the uterine wall, and it will become an embryo. Okay, after about a 6-week period, organs start to form and they start to function, and actually you can find a heartbeat at about 6 weeks is when that begins. Okay, and then after about 9 weeks time, we develop into the fetus, which is unmistakably human. The embryo and the zygote particularly, you may have difficulty understanding that they look human. You can see the pictures here, but at the fetal stage, there's no mistaking that that's definitely a human being, and they're very recognizable. The outer layers of the cells of the embryo, when it attaches, becomes the placenta, and the inner layers of cells become you. During this time, there's critical periods where any harmful substance, which are called teratogens, can come into through your mother, through the placenta, because that's what provides the nourishment for the baby. Also oxygen. So it can be a virus of some kind. It could be alcohols and fetal alcohol syndrome, which is a syndrome that's marked usually from heavily drinking mothers. However, it doesn't, it depends on when the mother drinks and everything. It's best not to drink at all if you are pregnant. But it has developmental delays and intellectual delays. Now, once you're born, you come into the world with a few talents that you have. You're born with several reflexes, and all children are. You think of, you have to eat. There's a sucking reflex. Anything you put in by a baby's mouth, it's going to suck. And, of course, that's how it eats. It has a rooting reflex, where if the cheek is brushed, the baby will turn towards the cheek. Okay, and obviously that is how mother will breastfeed. They'll touch the baby's cheek and it will turn towards it and begin sucking, and that's how it will get its nourishment. There's other ones. There's a Babinski reflex, is where if you touch the bottom of the foot, the toes splay out and then inward. There's a Morrow reflex, where the baby has a sensation of its head falling or dropping. It shoots its arm and legs out and then in, almost like it's grabbing onto something. And the grasping reflex, which is quite impressive. If you put your finger in a little baby's hand, it will grasp on very tightly. And you have to remember, it has no muscle control or real strength. This is purely a reflex that happens. Also, it comes into the world, or you come into the world too, with certain abilities. Your sense of hearing is well developed while you're in the womb. Your sense of smell, when you come out, you have a sense of smell. You have preference to certain tastes. You have a well-developed sense of pain as well. Your eyesight is not real good when you're little. It's very blurry. It's only about, I would say about 20 centimeters in front of you is about where the baby can focus its eyesight. So during infancy and childhood, the physical development, which is obviously very striking, happens basically along the lines that's genetically programmed into you, and it's basically the unfolding of these genes is how you change. It tells you when you go through, through growth spurts, you lose your teeth and so on, and so the maturation, we don't think of it as being, telling someone, act mature. We don't really get the gist of what it means. It actually means the natural unfolding of your genes. Your brain, when you come into the world, basically you have pretty much all the brain cells you're going to have when you're born. Okay, but your brain does go through developmental stages. One of the largest being at about 3 to 6 weeks, where your frontal lobes, 3 to 6 years, where your frontal lobes become quite developed. The last part to develop is your association areas. And of course, there's myelination that will occur too, sometimes into the 40s, at least into your 20s, 24 or so, where the frontal lobes are myelinated and the associations are also solidified. There is a pruning process once you get to the point, usually around adolescence, and it's basically where your brain is saying, well, we're not using this pathway at all, so we don't need to keep those connections. We're going to focus on strengthening these other connections. And this does show up later on in life. Even children, that had learned a language at a very early age and have forgotten it because they don't speak it. Say it's Punjabi, and they've learned that as a small child, as well as English, and they don't speak Punjabi for years and years, even into their 40s and stuff. We find that they will pick up that language much faster. They're able to find out, the structure of the sentences much easier than someone who's never spoken it. Motor development occurs. Obviously, babies have very little control of their motor development. Motor means moving. So learning to walk, there's a progression that occurs. Usually, baby learns, first of all, to lift its head, then raise its chest. This is happening from the head to the toe. This is known as the cephalocaudal principle. cephalocaudal principle of development, where the head develops first and then down to the lower extremities. Also, you develop from the inside out, which is called proximal distal. Okay, and that just means you will develop, say, for example, control of your shoulders before your elbows, before your hands, and so on. So from the inside out. Learning to walk, maturation has an awful lot to do with this rather than experience. Most children will go, well, all children basically go from being able to roll over to sitting, to crawling, to standing, and then to walking and running. However, we find there's instances where the environmental influences will have some effect on this. So, for example, there's a back to sleep program, and it's to help children to hopefully avoid sudden infant death syndrome. We put children on their back, and we find that is they're less likely to succumb to SIDS. And we find those babies tend to crawl later than other ones, or not at all. Not all children do crawl. Some go straight from sitting to standing to walking. Okay. Of course, once you get to that age where you're starting to walk, you know, it's very stiff-legged with the arms out, very uncoordinated, and some of the reflexes have to be succumbed by then or gained. There's one particularly, before we start to become mobile standing, is called a parachute reflex, and it's where if you fall backwards, you put your hands out behind you to brace your fall and protect your head. Okay, and of course you're walking around, you're a toddler because it describes basically how you walk. There's something called infantile amnesia, and you may be surprised to find this out. Actually, you probably know this now because we did the memory work. But by the age, most memories below the age of 3.5 are almost impossible for you to remember. And there are several reasons. Your brain is not developed totally. The hippocampus is one of the last parts of your brain to develop. And also, you know, remember how we make associations. You don't have as many things to make associations with. So we find that basically you can't remember anything before the age of 3.5. Any memory you have is very likely a false memory from misinformation effect. We do find, you know, there is some kind of memory. We've taught children to move a mobile with their feet. We tie a string to it. And then if we take the baby out of the crib and put it to the mobile, where it was taught in the crib, it forgets how to do it. And you might remember this example from the memory unit. But when we put the baby back in the crib, it remembers to move it. So there are context effects that do that. Okay, so that's the first part of development. And we're going to go through here. So there's lots to learn, so make sure you're keeping up. Bye for now. See you in class.